Good afternoon.
One's out of the cabinet.
Good afternoon.
On behalf of Friends of the Library, I want to welcome you here today for our very first book talk of 2023. I'm up here as chairwoman-elect because our chairwoman, Jane Schultz, is traveling somewhere around the world. I know she was in several parts of Africa, and the Facebook post I saw yesterday was Saudi Arabia.
Oh, my.
Meanwhile, our immediate past chairwoman, who wouldn't be supposed to be here, except Marcia Schultz, just arrived home last Saturday from Antarctica. She didn't feel very good, did a test, and guess what she has? COVID. So, here we go. We will have 3 more book talks throughout this year. And these will happen in April, September, and November. We're avoiding the summer months. We found we didn't get good attendance when people were doing a lot of traveling. The specifics of those are posted, and that little poster right behind her head over there on that shelf. And then you'll also get reminders in the HOA or GroupWorks emails. We had a print and a CD copy of our next book, All the Light We Cannot See, which are both checked out. There will be two more here, either this afternoon or in the morning. So it'll be first come, first served. And then you can also, of course, get it from the public library and buy it, whatever you want to do, but those will be around. Speaking of book purchases, I want you to hope you will notice, maybe we've got some new books. We spent a little over $1,000 this year so far out of the Friends of the Library budget, which is what all of y'all that are members of Friends of the Library have given to us. And one of those is several biographies of presidents, which we put out for President's Day. To give you a chance, President's Day is not actually until the 20th, but I wanted to give you a chance to check something out if you wanted to, before we closed. So speaking also as a volunteer in the library, if you haven't seen the messages, this whole building will be closed starting Monday for at least 2 weeks. And you know, sometimes those renovations don't go as fast as they're supposed to.
Oh, yeah?
And the library has to actually be closed on the weekend because, just look around, those computers are all going to be packed up and stored off-site as far as the library goes. These bookshelves are going to be wrapped in thick plastic to keep as much of the dust and all out. So there's work for us to do in here to get this ready before Monday, and that's why we had to go ahead and close on the weekend. We are going to stay open a couple hours late on Friday. Stay open until 7 instead of 4. So if you need to get in here, check out some books, check out some puzzles, check out some movies, get something to tide you over. Okay, and now to our program today. Our book under discussion is The Lost Man by Jane Harper. I know I found it to be a very good read. We have some excellent presenters today. They've been having so much fun discussing this book, they tell me. They both serve on the selection committee as well to help choose the books that will be the topic of discussions. And if you think that's something you would like to do, you might reach out and let me know. I'm Elaine Cushbaum, and I'm the one that's sort of the board, our Friends of the Library board, kind of helps liaison with this committee. And we may get some new blood on that committee if that's something you'd like to help do. So our speakers today, or our speakers, our guides today, how about that? LaDonna Michelle.
It's okay. Whatever it is. Okay, I'm still a dog.
Anyway, she's well known to most of you as a longtime resident. She says she's been here since 2005, and she's very involved in lots of groups and committees, so I bet you've seen her somewhere, even if you're new here.
Awesome.
She has previously led several of our book discussions and does a great job. She has a PhD, maybe this has something to do with it. She has a PhD in American literature and a minor in Britain. And I said, well, what about Australian literature? But anyway, they've been running these pictures of Australia back here, which I think is great. And secondly, joining us as a first-time presenter of a book talk is Cindy Voliva. Cindy has lived at Robson Ranch for 4 years. She has a master's degree in journalism, and at one time she taught writing for 6th graders. I figured if she can handle that group, she could handle history. So I just want to mention one other thing. We've gotten a variety of books in our book buying, and one of them has a little Yiddish proverb in it. A person's heart is like a sausage. No one knows exactly what's inside. And this other book that if you want to grab a book and read with someone small in your household, this one is dedicated to all the women who embrace their age and stay cheerful no matter what. So help me welcome LaDonna and Cindy.
This is the first rule of thumb on this. This is not a lecture. This is a discussion. And Cindy and I have great expectations that you guys will carry the bulk of the discussion. Now, we have a lot of opinions, and we've worked really hard to formulate them, but we're glad to share them. They are opinions. We'll be glad to share our opinions, but we expect you to share yours. So please do not hesitate in any way to speak up, because we would like to have this discussion be lively and thoughtful. And I think we're going to do it, because I don't know about you guys, I think this is a fabulous book, and this is the 3rd time I've read it, and the 2nd time I've led a discussion on it. So I think it's a book that has great merit. And every time I read this darn thing, it gets better and better, and that's kind of unusual for a book.
So most people read it.
How many of you read it? Cool. We're talking to a well-informed audience. There we go. That's good.
So for those of you who haven't, I'm sorry because there's going to be some spoilers.
Yeah, that's true.
But maybe you'll forget like I do. In 2 weeks I'll read it again. Oh wow, that was great.
Okay, so anyhow, please do not hesitate to speak up. We really are expecting a discussion out of this hour and a half. However long it takes us to make this book feel really good or feel really bad. Okay, Cindy, roll.
Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about Jane Harper. She's really young. She was born in 1980. You know, that's the shoe joke. You've got shoes older than she is. She moved to Australia with her family when she was 8 and lived there long enough to become a dual citizen. And then as a teenager, they moved back to the UK. She studied English and history at the University of Kent in Canterbury. And when she graduated, she took in England, they have a journalism entry qualification test that they have to take. So she took that, and she got her first job as a trainee on the Darlington and Stockton Times in County Durham. So she worked in journalism for 13 years total in the UK and in Australia. She moved back to Australia in 2008. She worked at various newspapers there and she started doing a little bit of short story writing. She submitted a story to a magazine called The Big Issue, and it got selected for one of 12 that they published in their fiction edition. So after that, it kind of emboldened her, and she decided that she was going to get more serious about it. She wrote a book called The Dry, and she submitted that manuscript to a group called the Victorian Premier Literary Awards, and she won. That was in 2015, unpublished. So we're talking 8 years ago. She had an unpublished manuscript, and that was her first one. So she's done a whole lot in that time. She has, I think there's 5 books out now.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there it is. She's got The Dry and Force of Nature, which are both the main character is a guy named Aaron Falk. And then she's got this book, Lost Man, which was her 3rd. She's got The Survivors, and one that came out about 2 weeks ago in the United States called Exiles. So if you haven't read others of hers, I highly recommend you check it out. She's a really good writer. When she writes her novels, she's decided that what worked for her in her journalism career is what she's going to do. So she goes and she sits down. She has an office, and she does it the same way that she did when she was writing for journalism. She keeps regular hours. She has a checklist of expectations of what she wants to do, whether it's, you know, I'm going to spend more time on Bub's character today or whatever, but, you know, so she checks it off and goes through what she wants to do during the day, and this is what I got to accomplish. She also thinks that because of her journalism career, she believes that people are capable of doing anything. And that sometimes, and she also believes in the randomness of things, that sometimes ordinary people are thrust into situations that it's something that they never thought that they would be in, and that their reaction to it is really different depending on who the person is. And so those things I think you can see in some of her characters in some of the books. She also said that she listens to her audiobooks, or the audiobooks of her books. She doesn't read them again after they're written, but she listens to them and she says, "Ooh, it's like listening to somebody else's book," because of the interpretation of the person who's reading it. And so I thought that was super interesting because the voice does kind of bring something different to it. Do any of y'all listen to audiobooks? Yeah, I do too. I really love them. It's a great way to get through books and hear it in a little bit different way.
I happen to know that Diana listened to this book.
Yeah, I did too.
It
I did
was
too.
terrific. I just finished it this week, and we have it here in the library.
Yes, we do have a copy of it here. Yeah.
And you said you really liked the voice.
I did too, and he did the Aaron Falk books, the first two, and I think he'll probably stay with her because he did a dual interview at the end of the one that I listened to from. I got it from Denton Library and downloaded it that way. Okay, so characters. Her characters are often outsiders, but she says she does not feel like an outsider in Australia, even though she lived in England for a lot of her life. She feels like it's home. She's had a child there. She also says the landscape is a gift. And she said she grew up in urban environments, but for her, the landscape comes first or second in the idea of the book. And when I was hearing that, I thought it was so interesting how she does things. She said she knows from the beginning who did it. Unlike some people that when they're writing, they say that as it goes along, the story becomes apparent to them. I was thinking about an interview I saw with Elizabeth Strout, who wrote Olive Kitteridge. I don't know if y'all have read that Pulitzer Prize-winning book. So I go to this interview, and it was just after it had come out, and she's talking about it, and she writes everything on Post-it notes like LaDonna, and she sticks them up on a wall all over the place, and has a lot of ideas, and she's pulling them down. And so anyway, she writes Olive Kitteridge, she gets the Pulitzer Prize, she's cleaning up her paperwork, she's like, oh wow, there's a whole stack of stuff she was going to have Olive do. And she said, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Well, about 3 years later, Olive again came out, and I just wondered, is that stack? So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that some people are really linear in the way they think, and some people are all over the place. So, but she's more of she thinks a lot about journalism and about how you have to lead, but then you want to give them little bits and pieces along the way to keep them reading to the end of the article. She is internationally known and respected in less than a decade. Some of the praise for Lost Man. New York Times Book Review said, all at once enthralling, book by book, Harper is creating her own vivid and complex account of the Outback. Literary masterpiece People magazine says it's a crime masterpiece, the AP engrossing, storytelling at its finest. You know, on and on and on. If you look at the front of the book, there's all kinds of praise for her. So again, it's amazing to me that she's done 5 novels in 8 years and become well-known and well-loved throughout.
And made a lot of money doing it too.
Heck yeah.
These are international
Heck yeah.
bestsellers.
Yeah.
These are not just books that are located in Australia. And I've seen one of the interviews I looked at, they had them in German, and German titles and all that. And some of the titles are different in different places.
That's because titles are not copyrighted.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting case. She has really done well for herself. And as far as I'm concerned, she deserves it. It's really good stuff.
I know. I'm going to read it. If she writes a phone book, I'm
You're
going to.
in. All right, that's good. Okay.
She lives in Melbourne. Melbourne, yeah. And she has 2 kids and a husband. Yeah, I think I skipped over that paragraph, sorry.
Yeah, but she does. And our story is actually kind of it's set in the middle southeast part of the Outback. You know, so it's up from Adelaide and over from Sydney, or Brisbane actually. So, I thought we'd do one thing just before getting to the book, but just kind of, it's always kind of interesting. You know, we talked, in the committee, when we talked about selecting books, we thought, you know, the very first book that was done by the Friends of the Library was a mystery. And we had a big crowd, because I was there. I didn't talk about it, but I was with a huge crowd. And, you know, most of the time we picked out very serious books to talk about. I mean, Mike and I worked in Occupy and the Western Front and Grant and For Whom the Bell Tolls and stuff like that. So most of the time we've had some very serious books. And so in the conversation with the committee, we thought, you know, maybe it's time we get back to something that everybody reads, which is mysteries typically, and kind of talk about that. But we want to make sure we picked a really good mystery, and I think we did that. But the point, though, I thought for just a second we're going to go off the path of this particular book and talk about mysteries in general, because there's a lot of stuff to think about. There are different kinds of mysteries. And Jean Greenblatt, if you've not seen her in action at Ollie, or heard her podcast with Susan Supak, or read her article in the Denton Chronicle, she talked about mysteries one day, so I'm going to give you some of her information and pass it on. How's that? And we were talking about different types of mysteries, and I thought it was kind of interesting because as you hear me talk about these, I want you to think which category this book falls in. Because to me, I haven't figured it out yet. I've got some speculation, but I'm not positive I'm right. Well, there's the thriller. You know, it's a thriller. Lots of things are happening. One of the writers that Jean Greenblatt talked about is an author named Brad Metzler. He writes a lot of thrillers. So that's one kind. Then there's the private eye novel. You know, we can think of a lot. Those are easy. That's Sherlock Holmes, if there's ever been a private eye. Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. Those are easy to see. Raymond Chandler. So there's the private eye detective story. There's the hard-boiled detective story. This is Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon. You know, it's Stieg Larsson, who wrote The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. That is definitely a hard-boiled situation. There's film noir kind of things. We think film noir, but there's also a noir detective story. And Gothic novels. Those are kind of a mystery. And Harlan Coben, who writes a lot of mystery novels, he writes that kind of thing. Daphne du Maurier, which we talked about this the other day, and I thought, maybe not. Rebecca, we've all seen Rebecca. That's kind of, or seen the movie, we've read the book.
And Ruth Westway, what is it?
Which one now?
What, Ruth Ware, Mrs.
The death of
Mrs. Westway, yeah,
There we
that's
go,
it.
thank you.
I'm mixing up the author and the name.
Okay, so that's a kind of mystery book. And then there's police procedurals, which is probably most of what we see and read. You know, there's Louise Penny, which we did this a book for Louise Penny, I guess last year or the year before. She has a detective set in Montreal. This is the Gamache series, and they're quite interesting, quite good. There's Deborah Cromie, who actually lives over in Allen, Texas, and she has a whole series of books set in England with Inspector Kincaid, and they are fabulous. If you haven't read them, they're wonderful novels. And there's and Gemma, his first employee, then in life. That's interesting. And of course, P.D. James with Autumn Douglas has been around forever, so that's a kind of novel, mystery novel. And this is the one where interesting. There's the Locked Room novel, in which, you know, it's just, who could have done it? You know, they're all in this one space. Well,
Got everybody together.
everybody's together in one space, and this one's the one that the one that she referred to is by a woman named Ruth Ware called The Woman in Cabin 10, which I've never read. I don't know. Okay, is it good? Okay, that's good to know. And then there's the non-professional detectives. You know, this is Miss Marple. You know,
I think it's every detective that's on the Hallmark Channel.
There we go.
It's the baker who figures it out when the police can't.
Jessica Fletcher. Okay.
That's right, Jessica Fletcher.
And actually, there's another author I wanted to mention in case you haven't heard of her. She lives down near Georgetown. Her name is Susan Wittig Albert, and her detective, well, non-professional detective, owns a herb store. And her roommate, her person who shares the building with her, is kind of a nut. So she does the crystal stuff. So, but that's a lady. Those are the kinds of detective novels that are typically, you know, there are people who are bound to their homes, their crafts, their kitchen, whatever. But they're not really professionals, but they still seem to have had a lot of crime in little bitty towns, is all I can think. And then, of course, there are the historical mysteries. There's a series about Brother Cadfield. He's a monk. Okay. We were talking about this the other city. Umberto Eco, a Name of the Rose. So there's a lot of books that were set in the 13th to 16th century that are also what we call historical mysteries. So that's kind of the lump group of them. So what is this book? Which one does this one fit in? Anybody got an idea? It's not a non-professional. It's not a hard-boiled novel. It's a thriller. Maybe it's a thriller. Not a thriller.
I know what I think it is.
Fire away.
In the box or what?
I think it's a locked room.
Locked room.
Isn't that crazy? Because it's all wide open and everything. But I think it's a locked room because everybody's everybody's there.
Yeah.
And it's a small, limited number of choices. So there you go. So I think that's a possibility. It does not fit. Her other books, her first two novels, are about a professional policeman, even though he's in financial crime.
He is.
But still, he's a professional policeman. So her first two novels are about that. But this one is really different because it's really not about the policeman. It's just not.
Well, the other way it's different too, and we talked about this, is there are elements that you expect to see in a mystery that are not in this one. Can you think, what are some things that you would expect to see
Yes.
that you don't see in this book? When you're reading a mystery, what are some things that you might?
Elements of it. For example, let me give an example.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Red herrings. If you read a mystery, don't you expect a lot of red herrings? Don't you expect suspense? Put you on the edge of your seat kind of thing? What else do you think about when you think about mysteries? What do you expect to see? You have compelling characters, you won't be reading it for very long, that's for sure.
A weapon.
A weapon, maybe, yeah, got a weapon.
We don't even really know the cause of death, do we?
Yeah, we don't even know how fast, yeah. And there's not exactly a cliffhanger because when the story starts, everybody's dead, the guy's dead. So it doesn't kind of work that way. I think the other thing that you get out of a good mystery is that all the evidence kind of makes sense, You're reading it and it's kind
It all
okay.
ties up.
I can sign up to that one. I believe that. It involves the reader. I think that's one of the things. Every good mystery, if you're not involved in it, you don't read it for very long, or if you read it, you go, and you throw it away as soon as you finish it. And the other thing I think you have to have in a really good mystery is a satisfying ending. It can't just happen. It's got to make sense. And I think those are the things that we need to talk about. Part of the things we need to talk about when we talk about this book is, does it all kind of come together? Do you believe it? Because obviously it's an interesting story and it doesn't have all the same elements you expect in a mystery.
It doesn't have a detective.
No
in any
detective
way.
to speak of, nope.
Not even a baker.
Yeah, not even a baker, right? And, and like I said, the guy's dead to start with. I mean, there's no suspense in it. The person's dead. So that's where you are. That's where you start from. So I think those are things we want to think about as we look at this mystery, to see why this mystery may be different from or better than others that you might have read. So kind of whirl that around in your head as you think about it. I think we want to talk a little bit about the landscape, just kind of, Cindy pointed out that Jane Harper thinks the landscape is a real blessing, it's a real gift, because I don't know if you saw the photos to start with, but the landscape in the outback where she talks about, it's amazing. It's dry at times and then it floods. I mean, it's all crazy.
It's opposites.
It's opposites, yeah. It's isolated, I mean, as you read this book, and you're thinking about the isolation. I mean, what is it that gives you the clues how isolated they are? Yeah, to go anywhere. When they have the accident, when the father dies in the car accident and the mother gets in an accident, it takes them 70 minutes to get there, according to the book. That's a long time for someone to be in a car accident without anybody around to help them. So 70 minutes. What else? It just gives you the clue about it. It's why you're convinced.
There's somebody
Eric?
there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Doris and I drove at 140 kilometers an hour for over 45 minutes on a highway in the outback and did not see a car in either direction. Either that we saw passing us up or passing, or that came the opposite direction. It is desolate.
It is nothing, right?
And none of the ranch land is fenced, and so there are dead cows all along the highway where they have gotten hit because
Oh,
there's
my
no
God.
fencing to keep them off the highway.
That's
If you call it that.
Did anyone else have a sense of claustrophobia when they were reading this book? I feel like it was closing in on you. I mean, I just thought that was the interesting kind of, for me, I just felt really like it was closing in.
Well, no, one thing that made it obvious on remote thing is just how much food they had to eat.
Exactly.
They didn't have just a refrigerator, they had a cold
room. I think that's me. I think that's one of the reasons I think this book is good. She doesn't tell you that it's isolated. She tells you things that convince you it's isolated. They have to have a cold room with 6 months of supplies. When the refrigerator goes out, it takes some months to get a repairman out there. Remember the repairman comes in the middle of the night? It takes forever to get there. They have to have a radio. For doing radio around the property so they can find out where people, you have to log out, tell them where you're gonna go. All that stuff just emphasizes in my mind how terribly, terribly isolated and separated they are from other human beings and from other things that we think of as normal, like local police and all that kind of stuff. You know, and the other thing, even the policemen, you know, they try to get hold of the policeman. There's one policeman. You know, and they fly some guy in from nowhere, and the locals go, what do you know? And they're waiting for the other guy to show up. And every time they meet him, he's off somewhere else on that area. You know, he's up taking care of some bus accident, or thinking, was it a bus accident? It's something like that. It's a bus accident.
Yeah.
So I mean, all those things that she tells you are things. She shows you how isolated it is. She doesn't tell you that it is. She shows you that it is. The GPS, remember when our hero, Nathan, or maybe not hero, his family's worried about him. They make him have a button he has to push to check in. That tells you that you're in the middle of nowhere with no one around. I mean, it's pretty clear that she makes a great case. Yes, go.
Well, she makes a big deal about how hostile the climate is.
Yes.
In addition to being in the middle of nowhere,
Yes.
she makes you feel like if you go for a 15-minute walk, you're in danger of heat stroke and you're never coming back.
Right.
I don't know whether that's an exaggeration or not, but she certainly emphasizes that in setting the scene.
Yeah, they describe the survival kit in the back of Cam's car. They don't understand how he could die because he has all the right stuff. And I think another thing that you mentioned, the hostile environment, I lived in West Texas for a while, so this is probably the reason I think about it. And Ilsa is taking the clothes off the line, and then she left it out there too long, and they're all full of dirt. You've got to start all over again and going like, you know, what a terrible thing to happen. But I think all of that plays into why this book is so good, is you get all these little details that make you, the reader, assume and define the picture of this place. And I think that takes a remarkable author to do that without making you feel it's contrived. And I never once felt that that was a contrived story, that this was just made up kind of thing. So I think that's pretty cool. I did want to say one thing about it. I'm going to read this one second page of this thing. And as pointed out, I do have a few notes. Toward the end of the book, Xander is trying to figure out how to get his dad to leave this rotten place. You know, and Nathan has plenty of reasons to leave. My God, he's an outsider, he's been ostracized, he's criticized, everything is wrong. And yet he talks about this when he's trying to get Xander to come to grips with the fact that it's not all that bad. He says, and this is toward the end of the book, it's on page 300 because you have the book. He says, he couldn't simply leave for lots of reasons, financial, practical, and not least because sometimes, quite a lot of the time, he felt connected to the outback in a way that he loved. There was something about the brutal heat when the sun was high in the sky and he was watching the slow, meandering movements of the herds, looking out over the wide open plains and seeing the changing colors in the dust. It was the only time when he felt something close to happiness. If Xander couldn't feel it himself, and Nathan knew not everyone could, then he couldn't explain it. It was harsh and unforgiving, but it felt like home. I mean, that is pretty good writing for an amateur journalist. So there we go. So, and talking about this, one of the things we talked about also, I think is going to be pretty important, because in the very outset of this book, the first thing you read in the prologue is about the environment. Do y'all recall that? a good mystery starts with a good first chapter. If they don't get you there, it's not worth reading. In this first chapter, this opening section, she talks about the Stockman's grave and the dust circle around it. So from the very beginning of this book, you are very cognizant of the environment. It is not a place to be by yourself without something, without a radio, without water, without whatever. And so at the very outset of this book, you are focused on the landscape. You are focused on the place where the suspense, if there is suspense, where the action happens, if there is action, right there. So it's pretty cool. It's a great beginning in my estimation.
There's also, I want you to tell, what is the gravesite?
Oh,
It's brushed away in the prologue.
Oh yes, it's so cool.
What does it say?
I think this is a better title. I'm sorry, we should write Jane Harper a note.
New title for the book.
Yes. You know, when they look at the gravestone, they realize they can't read the numbers. They don't know exactly when it happened, but the thing they do remember, and they can read, is the little epigraph that says, "Who went astray." And everybody in this book,
Wouldn't that be a good title?
that'd be a great title. Everybody
Who went astray?
in this book goes astray just about. And I think it's really a good way. It's just it's almost foreshadowing or a premonition about how this book's going to go. And again, it's anonymous. It's in the middle of nowhere in this dusty, incredibly hostile environment. It's just a great beginning. Anybody else have a comment about the landscape? Want to talk about it? Yes, go Joanne.
Just the thought, that little bit of shade is how you keep moving.
Yes.
Exactly,
Isn't that?
exactly.
Oh, that is awful, isn't
Such
it?
a
How the
picture.
Yeah, it's like a sundial, but it's not very big, so you can't stay in the shade very long. It is a great image. Yeah, Mike.
I found myself wondering why so many of these people were right on the edge of insanity.
Yes.
And that connects so well, though, with how ugly and how harsh the environment is.
Stunted
And the
people.
way they have to live is basically isolated.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a sense of foreboding to me when I read about it.
Yes.
Right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And then it went on to, then there were these people that didn't have a chance to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like the father, who was
Right.
the child beater, and
Mhm.
and Cameron never had a chance to defend himself, so that left you accepting what others thought about them, but they really didn't know them. Maybe they should, and that's attributable, I think, a lack of socialization, isolation,
Sure.
borderline insanity on the part of Nathan, because he hasn't talked to anybody for the race for 10 years.
Exactly, and that's really cool. And it all kind of pulls together. It all, to me, it felt like the reason these people are doing things and not escaping and going off and doing something different, it kind of pulled them in, and they don't even sense there's another avenue to get away, to go and do something different. I think that's really cool. Yeah, Joe.
Well, getting back to the locked room, again, like the heat, she describes an environment, at least their part of it, that doesn't look anything like the pictures you were showing. The pictures you were showing, I had to ask myself, well, I wonder where that is. Because it doesn't look like where this story took place.
Well, those are actually
It's
just from
just
Australia.
Queensland,
From
yeah.
the outback.
Queensland.
But her description of the background in the book,
Yes, it's much more harsh.
again, contributes to that locked room feeling.
Yes.
That, again, you can't go anywhere because there's nowhere to go. And you're gonna die if you try it.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well be in a locked room.
Might as well be there. Exactly. She does a terrific job in making this landscape a character, in making it really a driving force in the way the story unfolds, and in the way the characters have been created, or they've been altered by that experience. I think even just the backpackers that come through there. There are a couple backpackers that, so when they talk about others early in the novel, besides Simon and Katie, I mean, you sense that they're just passing through, and they're here just because of the money, and they have this, they also, I think, let you feel or sense that there's such isolation there, and yet these people that are there, these backpackers, are not exactly what you call regular people either. You know, they're guys that have come, left their home for one reason or another, in most cases not really good reasons. You know, things have happened to them that are they're harsh or unpleasant, and now they've gone to this environment which is equally harsh and equally unpleasant, and they stay there for a short period of time and then they move on. Yeah, go, there.
Those backpackers, I mean, we experienced a lot. The British culture, the Australian culture, you do your OE, your overseas experience.
Yeah.
Everybody does it for 1 year. And you literally get these odd jobs so you can stay in hostels, so you can keep moving in a travel experience for 1 year. And they do that generally between when they graduate from high school and before they start college. They
Yeah.
take 1 year of overseas experience.
Yeah.
And so a lot of Aussies go to Europe, and a lot of Europeans, especially the Brits, come to Australia.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just a natural way of life for them.
But I think the ones that we see in this book, though, have had some harsh event
They're gritty.
back where they
Yeah.
were, and
Yeah.
they've left there for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Simon's business has failed and got in debt. Katie's because she's with him, and Ilsa leaves. She has an episode, the reason for leaving also, and I can't remember what it is right off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
I don't remember it either.
Anyway, there's
Why she's
the ones
there.
that we see are like that, and then there's references to a Polish backpacker and so on. So there's a lot of stuff like that. It's pretty cool. One of the things I thought we ought to talk about as we go into this book about, and where, there we are, up there, Golden Rules of Humanity. You know, and I think, Mike, what you were saying earlier kind of fits into this. You know, the one thing, the reason that Nathan is so ostracized is what?
He didn't help the,
Yeah,
his enemy
don't
out.
buy somebody.
He didn't help. And in this environment, in this physical environment, you must help no matter what. And he doesn't do that. And for that, he is 9 years ostracized from the community. Can't even go into town. I think one of the things I thought that was so compelling as they talk about this is that he is so distraught with this early on that he goes in and sits outside of the bar in the dark just to hear voices. And I think that's really a crushing statement about isolation. I mean, if you don't hear a voice and you'd rather go sit outside a bar somewhere when you can't, they won't let you in. I mean, that is a telling comment on his isolation. But this whole thing about not taking care of others. In the emergency, you know, his ex-father-in-law is hardly a gem, you know. I mean, he's not someone you want to be friends with, probably. But it doesn't matter. He was in danger, and Nathan was mad, and he drove by. Now, granted, 30 minutes later, he comes back, and it's too late, which is kind of an interesting perspective all by itself. But I think that's a golden rule of humanity in here, and I think that rule about not taking care of others applies to darn near every character in this book. If you look down through it, think about it. You know, you have the mom. She doesn't take care of her children. You have Liz. She doesn't take care of her children. Her father, her brother, didn't take care of her. Ilsa, and then they try things to take care of her, but they don't complete the task. And all the bad consequences come from that. You know, I mean, it's just, it truly is the golden rule. And in Australia, where they set this story, it is such a compelling reason. You have to do this. It is not an option in order for the community, the society to survive. And every one of those people that don't do this end up with some pretty nasty consequences. Pretty nasty consequences.
Well,
Got some more examples?
most all of the Ten Commandments were violated by American. I don't mean to sound overly religious, but you tick them off, you know, somebody violated, at least one of the characters is
At least one.
violated each one,
Yeah,
probably more than one.
yeah.
And I think one of the big ones too is that parents are supposed to take care of their children. And in this situation, Xander is really, really feeling for his dad. He's worried about it. He's trying to get him to make changes. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to see him trying so hard to reach his dad and have his dad not hear him.
Well, I ended up just liking Liz halfway through the book,
Yep.
Mom, because you kept getting the references of how mean the dad was to the kids
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
to her, and you could understand why they were so screwed up.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But I kept asking myself, why didn't she do something?
Why don't you fix it?
That the other side of me says, well, what would she do? You know, and that got turned though, of course, as the book went along, when she did do something.
Yeah.
The close-
But you also find out with Liz, she comes from domestic, you know, she sees Carl and she thinks he's gonna be different. He's gonna be different, but he's just like her family that she came from. So-
And then Cameron ends up just like Dad, and
Yep.
maybe because Nathan was so isolated, maybe that was cleansing to him.
It was something, you know, and
It was a conscious decision
conscious
too.
decision, I think, almost.
Yeah.
In early on in the book, I don't know if y'all recall the scene, in the scene where the father, Carl, is punishing the two boys for running away. And he makes the children bring out their favorite thing, and he makes Nathan burn his guitar. That is the nastiest man I've ever seen. How horrible to do that. He does that, and then he makes Cameron bring out his books, first book, and then Cameron doesn't apologize. He makes him get all of his books. And you see right there that Nathan is just broken down and grief-stricken, and Cameron looks him in the eye and pushes back, in one sense. He defies him. He never, ever does it. And so you begin to sense, at least for me, as I read that section, that Cameron and his father were more alike than not. They were more alike than not. And that was early. That's an early, in his childhood, essentially, you see that. So, but Nathan, even early on, was different from Cam, but it's kind of an interesting thing. You know, there's that business about parents not taking care of their children and not communicating. I think the other thing, they don't communicate. Nathan turns off the damn radio. You can't even communicate with anybody. You know, he turns off the radio, and Xander, and he doesn't talk to his ex-wife about his kid, except through the lawyer. It costs him a lot of money, and it's all this, about the money. I mean, I think that's part of the story, is the communication lines are not very good. And when Ilsa tells Liz about her abuse from Cameron, Liz just kind of blows her off, just kind of says, oh, it's all on you. I think that communication thing, the fact that the humans are not communicating effectively with each other, is also kind of a golden rule of humanity. If you want to live among humans and be a human, you have to be willing and able to communicate. And I don't think there's a very good communication for quite a long time in this book. And it starts early on.
That domestic violence thing too, of not telling.
Yes,
tell.
don't tell.
You know, don't touch the painting and don't tell.
Don't tell.
You know, those are the golden rules of their house.
Yes, don't touch the painting. Don't touch the painting.
Well,
And-
especially for Liz to blow off
Ilsa?
her daughter-in-law when she knows what happened to her.
Exactly.
So she,
Yeah, but it is a function of communication, and it also is a function of the abuse situation. No one wants to admit it. No one wants to tell anybody about it so it can stop. So I think that you're right. It just seems very hard. And I think that's why Liz is known as likable. You know, she doesn't, there's a line that she talks about when Nathan tries to hug her. When Xander and Nathan come to the home after, goes back to the station where they live, where she lives, after they find the body of Cam, she sees Xander for the first time coming back from vacation. She gives him a big hug. And then when she hugs Nathan, the phrase they use is, it's not a hug, it's the rusty edge of underuse. So that's the line from Jane Harper, the rusty edge of underuse. And I think that there's a case where this woman, this mother, for whatever reason, because she's let her son get away from her, emotionally and intellectually get away from her, she doesn't even know how to respond to him. You know, on Christmas, they're coming in for Christmas. I know it's dead body in the way, but
She's already
still,
lost
it's
one
Christmas.
son.
Yeah, I mean, it's Christmas. Come on, woman, get real.
So if you look for the causes of the effect, implied is the outcome. You know, it's a harsh place, and people are isolated, but doesn't mean that humanity can't overcome these things if they're honest enough. Now Liz ended up why I like her, she broke the circle.
Yes, she does.
With Cameron. And, you know, who would have thunk at the beginning of
Yep,
she thought she was, but it was from what she did. But she broke that circle, and she saw humanity as much in Nathan.
Mhm.
And so I think it's kind of it broke the depression for me. It looks like, that in the end, Nathan's gonna be okay, and
We hope so.
we're kind of okay, as good as you can get in that place.
I think he makes a lot of changes as the book progresses. They're not as obvious at times, but I think we'll see him as we get chance toward the end of the book. There were a lot of changes that Nathan makes in himself. He actually develops. He changes a bit from time to time. I think that's pretty impressive. I think the other thing they talk about, here's the Outback local rule. Stay in your car. Don't get out of your car. I thought that was kind of interesting because every time they get out of their car, they're in trouble.
Right.
Ellie?
Well, we're talking about Liz. She's a mother. I'm a mother. I'm assuming a lot of you are mothers. Could you have done that to your son? Even if he was a jerk?
We have one quotation we're going to talk about right in this discussion, which is exactly about that, is what have we done here, and is this the right thing to do? But that's a good point. That's a good point. Can
What
she
else
do
would
that?
she have done? If she knew that was going on, and it was gonna continue to go on.
Yeah.
What would one do living in that place? Because she had no one really to turn to.
Well, she said what was done and what wasn't the right thing to do. It was probably the right thing to do, but I still think a lot of mothers couldn't do that.
Well,
And will put up with things from their kids, sometimes way past the point that maybe they should.
But he had already broken the granddaughter's arm when she was young. And she saw in her son what she had endured from her husband.
exactly.
And I think she was saving the broader family, not just her son.
Well, I think the interesting thing is early on, remember all this, and we're going to talk about it, they have the buried treasure, you remember when Ilsa buries the passports and the money? But we also find out that Liz had buried treasure. She had collected money, put it into a tin, and her husband found it and then took it away. I think what you said, Mike, is exactly right. She, early on, tried to escape abuse. She was planning on getting away from her husband, and it failed. And then she's now out in the Outback in the station here, and she's already failed once at doing it, so maybe her options about what she can do to get out of this are really limited. Her own past experience tells her that she was not successful in getting away from the villain. And here she is again. So maybe what she does is the right thing to do. It certainly breaks the cycle on the abuse at this point. Yeah, Gary?
Well, to Elaine's point, she didn't commit a crime per se. She simply allowed a natural death to occur. She didn't have a weapon, she didn't inflict any harm.
Intent.
You don't think she knew he was going to die out there?
Intent.
Right,
Her
the intent was
pretty
there.
clear.
The intent was there, but the same as Nathan drove by his father-in-law could have died if within that 30-minute time he was gone, somebody else
absolutely.
had him to assist.
Absolutely.
And he would have gotten away with it, right?
And he would have gotten away with it. In this harsh environment, if you simply take away the capability to survive, that's what she did.
This is going to be a really good discussion.
So-
I can already wait.
And all of the evils that she could have done, she took the one that she didn't really directly commit murder.
But the rules of the Outback
But the rules of
are
the Outback
different.
you home.
Well,
Are
she stole his
different.
car.
That kind of fits into the nature of truth,
Yeah,
though.
let's talk about the nature of truth from, yeah, Ann.
I was thinking the first clue I had that maybe Cameron was not such a nice guy, and I can't remember, it was about the middle of the book, and Nathan was thinking about, maybe it was Ilsa that he took away at the campfire.
Yes.
And I think that was my first time, I'm thinking, oh, maybe there's something different.
There is something wrong with
Yes.
Cameron.
Yeah.
I'm with you. We're going to talk about that. I think
Oh,
that's
okay.
really kind of
Yeah.
important. There's a couple things I want to talk about. We're talking about the nature of truth in this book, because I think maybe that's what we're getting at. You're saying it's not murder because she doesn't actually shoot him or knife him, okay? I don't know about that. I think the intent is he's going to die, so I think it's still murder. But anyway, Okay, so that's a point, you know, there's truth and there's not truth. There's truth and there's not truth. One of the things that, I was gonna read this little thing here, this, one of my pages, I think I have this. When Xander is talking to, they're trying to discuss the truth of matters, and Xander and Nathan have just had a fight, so to speak. They've had a discussion, and so Xander says to Nathan, he says, two people can remember different versions of something and both think it's the truth. And Nathan says, can they? And Xander replies, yeah, of course. You and Mom do it all the time. And I'm like, whoa, that is really true. Because everybody's version of truth is a little bit different. Just think about the Stockman story. I went back through, I was telling Cindy this, I went back through and counted all the different stories. There are 5 different versions of the Stockman. 5 different ones. And it's almost as if the person who's telling that version needs to hear it that way. You know, first of all, the first time we hear about it, and this is early on in the book, Bub is telling one of the stories, that's not his story per se, he's telling the story, and this is, Nate, you finish it, about the cattle thieves, the guys who are rustling up the cattle, and they wander off, and the horses get away, and this guy doesn't get there, and he ended up dying. That's the first Stockman myth. Okay, that's the first one. And the second one, the little girls think it's a ghost, you know. Well, for a little girl, they're like 5 and 8, we decided they're 5 and 8, ghosts make a lot of sense, you know, so that makes sense. And then Cam, a little older on, he explains that it was a shooting accident by the Stockman. He was crawling through the fence and blew his head off by accident. That's how come he's after. But, you know, Cam's trying, you know, to kind of make things go okay. And then the next person who tells the story, and that's one in the book, and this is Bub's version of it now, he says, the reason the Stockman's out there is he raped an indigenous woman and they got him. And that's why he's there now. So for Bub, it's about, you know, doing the wrong thing. And then finally, Nathan, who's the only one that's bothered to find out what the real story is, finds out that it's a man who's out with his family on horses, and a big storm comes up, and the horse is spooked, and one of the horses gets away, and the little boy has gone away. He goes down and finds the little boy, and he knows they can't both get on the same horse, and he sends the little boy back to his home, back to the station, and the father dies. That's a story about saving your family, about taking care of your family, taking care of other people. And that's Nathan's story that he tells, which is kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So there are all these different versions of the truth in this book. And these are just the ones having to do with the Stockman. And there's a whole lot of other, you know, versions of the truth, you know, as you read this book. I mean, it is, everybody's perception is done because they need that perception for themselves. And think about poor Bub. Think about Bub.
We talk about Bub a lot.
Bub, what does his family think of him?
He's nuts.
Dumb as a post. He's dumb as a post. His father didn't want him, didn't like him, didn't treat him well. His mother doesn't think much of his brain, you know.
Cameron certainly didn't nurture him in any way.
Nobody does. The only person that even has the least inkling that Bub's got something inside his head besides rocks is Ilsa. And she says at one point when he's explaining, he explains a process that would be better for them on the station. She's the only one that acknowledges that has merit. The rest of them are going, no, and blowing off. And he accepts that version of truth about himself for such a long time. He believes he's not the brightest bulb. That's an awful thing, yeah.
Was he autistic by any chance?
I don't know.
Just his actions, he didn't cooperate, he didn't say things and so on. I wondered.
I don't know.
I actually felt the same thing. He couldn't pick up on the social cues of his father.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that either. I think Bub's a function of the fact that, this is a theory, not mine, honestly. He's the fall crop in a family. He has 2 older brothers, then it's a long time before he's born. So by the time he's born, his brothers have formed their own tight relationship, so that can't break into that one. No one's going to let him in there. His mom and dad, you know his mom, but you know his dad doesn't care for him because it's interfering with his life, whatever. So here's a guy who, in his own way, is just as isolated. And so for him to be able to develop social skills, to be able to work with other people, kind of limited. And I think Mike's point, the fact that he's out in the middle of nowhere, there's not a lot of contact with any other.
It's not like he's going to preschool when he's little. Or
Yeah, he missed preschool, therefore he cannot communicate. Ah, there we go. But I mean, but his perception, the truth of who love is not accurately perceived by most of the characters in this book. You know, and Nathan, to some extent, is the same way. You know, he's this evil critter who let this man in. In that environment, it is true, he should never have done it, but he's this evil man who left his ex-father-in-law to die because they thought he had a fight. I mean, that's, that's a harsh statement. And for 9 years, the whole community treats him that way. He's like a nobody, and worse than a nobody. He is truly cut off from society. And
he's totally bought into it.
And he's bought into it, yeah.
I think he believes it. I think he thinks he's a bad guy. And also he ponders that idea that Keith Walker, his father-in-law, said about, I know what men like you do. You know, which is the reason why he didn't want Nathan to marry his daughter in the first place. I know what men like you do. And he doesn't know what's going on because he doesn't realize what Cameron did. And you know, Carl going over to Walker's property and talking to the backpackers there and sending them on their way. And but that's been kind of in the back of his mind. I know what people like you do, men like you do. In the back of his mind, and all of a sudden, I think he has everything fits together, and he realizes what his ex-father-in-law thought of him and what the town thinks of him and everything. But I think he's totally 100% vested in this is who I am. I'm a person who doesn't deserve love. I don't deserve to be around. I don't deserve a radio check yet. That's who I am.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is part of it. This whole story about the nature of truth is real. In this book, it's very meaningful. You know, what you do and what you see is how you operate. And when you don't believe you're valued, then, you know, this whole thing about, you know, the suicides and stuff like that, I mean, this whole thing begins to kind of peel on that. There we go.
Nathan, at one point in the book, it's page 306, says, Nathan may not know much, but in his heart he had always held on to the single ingrained truth. Out there, he was on his own.
Yeah, he's on his own, exactly. He's just so isolated.
He's an isolated prisoner.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. So that's really kind of interesting. So I think this whole concept of truth is really part of this
touchstones.
Oh, the touchstones. Oh, yes, we talked about this. Okay, who are the characters in the book that actually have a handle on reality? Anybody got an idea?
Xander?
He has, but he has
somebody who lives there. How about, he's a visitor.
Well, he's also more immature, so there's some elements of him. Yeah. But he definitely has a handle.
Somebody that lives in the outback.
Yeah.
Maybe the policeman?
The policeman. Oh, that's right. Glenn seems to have a handle on reality. So does Steve, the nurse, I think. Because the nurse understands this profound effect on Nathan, and he doesn't see him as evil. He just sees him as this isolated figure in which the isolation is driving them further and further away from humanity. I think they're like the touchstones for reality. And Glenn, even though we only see him for about maybe 4 pages in the whole freaking book, except at the very end where it's important, you know, he too also seems to have a handle on the reality. He understands the ostracism of Nathan. He also understands that it's not fair, and over time, it should have dwindled away. So I think we have some characters in here that have a sense of reality and have a sense of sort of the way that you measure the truth of who these people are. I think that's how I perceive them. And I think Xander does that too. I think that's a good point. You know, he comes from his mother's house out to the outback, and he senses his father's in real trouble.
Yes. But I don't think
those are also characters who have more of a relationship with others.
There you go. The outside world.
They're not so isolated.
Not so isolated. Exactly. That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that.
I also think that these people that are, what did you call them, that they're just on the edge of insanity, I don't think they realize that they're on the edge of insanity. I don't think they realize how bad things are or how dire they are.
Well, it does explain
most people who are.
We don't get
it. There you are. That's why we have such a big high murder rate in the country.
That's right.
Well, it explains a lot. I mean,
one of the things I want to talk about some of the mechanics. We don't want to. When you guys get bored, let us know. Just wave your hand and we'll shout. I think that a couple things about the book, the mechanics of the book, how this works. one of the reasons I think this is such a good novel is I think it's very subtle. I mean, you learn things in ways that you don't expect to learn them. You know, you learn about who these people are by listening to their dialogue over the table. You learn who they are by listening to their interaction with another character. You learn who they are by things that are happening. And so it's not as if the author says, okay, this is who this guy is, get it, and then move on. These things are kind of developed, and there's some elements in this book I think that are really kind of critical to the development of the story. For instance, cars. You know, there are scenes in the cars that are really, really important. The first scene of the car, besides Cameron's car, you know, he's out and they find the car, and he should not have failed. In any way, he should have been fine, because the car worked, the survival kit was there, it's all there. So that's one big important part of the car. The car that should have saved him was there, could have saved him if it had been close. So that's kind of an important thing. So that car's really important. The next time we see a car, or actually in the storyline, it's the next time, it happens before this, is Ilsa and Nathan get it on in the car, right? They meet, they talk, they make friends, and then a couple weeks later they go out and they have sex in the car. And that sounds terribly uncomfortable, but you know what? Who am I to judge? So there we have.
They're young.
They're young. They are young. And that's the other
Not 18-year-olds.
I forget, as I read this book, how young they are in parts of the story. I mean, parts of the story, they're in their early 20s, you know, or they're in their late teens. So, you know, you have that. So this car scene's pretty, and then toward the end of the book, we have another little sex scene in the car. So that's pretty good. That's
So it
good
must
too.
have been comfortable.
They must have had a mattress or something. Who knows how that worked? But something worked in the car. But the other thing that's important about the car is that there's a couple of scenes where there are conversations in the car that are very, very meaningful to the story. One of them is which Xander and, well, they're actually driving along. Xander and his father are talking, and Xander is just begging his father to leave. And this conversation takes place in the car. And Nathan's going like, no, not even gonna do that. So that's a big deal. So I think that's a big scene in the story, because it tells you a lot about Xander. It tells about his awareness of what's happening to his father, which he's concerned about. It also tells you about how Nathan is not entirely in tune with what's actually happening to himself. He doesn't even get it at that point in time. That's a big deal in that car conversation. And then the other car conversation, which I just love, is at the end of the book when Bub and Nathan, after the fight, get in the car, they're sitting in the car, and they make up. They actually resolve some issues. We find out that Bub was feeling really guilty about killing Nathan's dog accidentally. And, you know, Nathan's really feels bad about Cam being left, or Bub being left in the hands of Carl. You know, I mean, it's just kind of a great resolution, I think.
I think it was the warm beer.
With the warm beer. And there was like 6 of them too.
Got cooler over time though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Gary.
As Klaus writes in his book, you know, we've all probably been in the sandwich generation where we've had to take care of our parents as well as our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And when that transition happens, that your parents in effect become your kids, and you're having to take care of them. And here is Xander doing that at about 18 or 20 years of age.
16 years old, yeah. He's 16.
Taking care of a father who's maybe only 40-ish. When we did it at 60 and 80, he's doing it at 20 and 40.
Yeah, he's actually 16, yes. He's really a kid, yes, exactly, yeah. Elaine?
There was another just one sentence, I think, but it was, you know, Cameron's car was up there, and after it's been searched and everything, Nathan gets in the car to drive it. And I don't even remember whether it was right then or whether he thinks back to it, but he had to adjust the seat, which he and Cameron were about the same height. And he had to adjust the seat. So you know that whoever had driven it last was smaller.
And the keys were wound
And
up.
the keys were there in the front.
Nathan doesn't make the connection for quite a while in the book, but he does notice it then. He doesn't recognize what that really means.
He just, it's
Just like a little
goes
glimpse.
through his
Yes.
head,
Yeah.
and then the story just moves on. It doesn't spend any time with it.
Yeah.
But it leaves that little piece of information in there.
It's just
Yeah,
dangling there.
yeah, a little thing to consider and remember. So I think as I think about, like, say, the mechanics of this book, I think the car is a big deal in the book, because it's a very important instrument in terms of surviving in the outback, but it's also a very important instrument as we learn more about the characters, who they are, and how they can resolve problems. And Nathan the Bug can't resolve it.
Ilsa's car, they kept giving her problems.
Right, exactly.
Oh, because
So,
Cameron
yes.
was messing with it.
Yeah, he was trying to control her and was doing a damn good job of doing that, he really was. So I think the car's a big deal, obviously, and you can't ignore the painting. I mean, it's there. I mean, yeah. Don't touch the painting, don't touch the painting.
Or then you've got a second generation, a 5-year-old who apparently has as much or more talent than Cameron. So then you start wondering, is it really that great a painting? I realized that the Ace Hardware had some sort of a local contest and it won, and it's got the blue ribbon from it. I don't know. It just.
Yeah, I think that's really a good piece right there as well. There's a lot of
silent moments.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to have not enough time at the end.
Okay, all right. Okay, one of the things in the book, and this, again, Cindy and I talked about this book, because we spent a lot of time on this book, and I've read it several times, and so I did not notice most of this stuff the first time through, just did not. I read the story, I thought it was, wow, great story. But I didn't get all the little finer points to it, and I think in this read of the book, what I noticed is the importance of silence. There are moments in this book where there's silence that absolutely grossly affects the outcome of the story in so many ways. The first one, or the first time in terms of in the way the book's written, is when Nathan is trying to get back in tune with the community. He's trying hard, he makes this horrible apology, and they just all going off. His father, Liz and Carl try to help him. Harry helps him, not Carl. Liz and Harry try to help him get back with the community. He reads this apology, and in the book it says, and Cam takes a beat, and then he helps him. So there's this moment of silence, or one moment of separation, where Cam does not help Nathan when he could have. And Cam is the charmer. He's the one that's already got good relationships in the community. He would be the right guy to do this, and he does not. It takes him a minute, and then he gets there. That's an important one. Then there's another thing. This is the big one. This is the one I think we can't avoid. Is when, when Cam and Nathan come back from the evening in the dunes, and they're there, and there's the phone call about Jenna, and Carl comes out. And he confronts the two boys, and Nathan takes a moment, and that's exactly what it says. Takes a moment, takes silence before he responds to his father, and his father then takes that as Cam is actually a rapist.
Yeah.
He does or doesn't, who doesn't matter. But the point of Cam, from that moment on, resents Nathan, because Nathan didn't support him in his time of need. Now, we all know that Cam didn't deserve to be supported, but from Cam's perspective, and in that point of the story, that is the moment in which Cam turns on Nathan in a real way, and he turns on him in a real way there. Now, that's kind of important. And then there's another time when Nathan and Ilsa are talking about the would-be rape, and Ilsa asks about it. Another moment of silence, and it's the lack of communication that we've talked about, and all it does is sets the person who's expecting a response, it sets them on edge, and they don't know what to think. And there's like 6 times.
It happens with Nathan and Xander too.
Yes, it does actually. And this is when it really torques off Xander. Xander is trying desperately to get his father to leave. And once again, Nathan is silent, and Xander thinks, you don't care. And that breaks up that relationship, and that's about midway through the book. And you'll realize there's a section there where Xander and Nathan are not at all getting along. And there's another time that it happens too. After the Nathan goes out and checks out the car and the distance, he comes back to explain to Xander what he'd done. And he also checked to see whether you could see it from the road, the car from the road. He starts to tell him all this stuff, and Xander has the long silence. and doesn't respond. And so it's a break. It indicates all these breaks. And then the last one, which is kind of a good one, actually, sort of kind of, is this moment of silence, of which Harper makes a big deal of these, is that when Nathan's talking to Jackie, to his ex-wife, trying to talk to him on Christmas Day, and they're actually having a conversation for the first time in a long time, and then there's a bit of a silence, and you sense that Jackie's going, wait a minute, we were being nice and now we're not. And it resolves itself more positively. But this moment of silence where someone doesn't respond back, this delay, the people who sense that delay take offense. They develop a grudge.
They fill it in.
They fill it in
that silence
with what they think, which is not necessarily what would have been said or was felt. So I think, and I think that's really clever on Harper's part to do that, because you don't think about it, but yet, when we have conversations with our family or someone who's important to us, and they're not listening,
Right.
how that goes, or they're going like, really, you think that? All those things make you react as a person, because that's who you are. You want them to communicate with you, and you want them to respect what you think and say. And this happens over and over and over in the book. And it's just, it's a sentence here, it's a sentence there, it's a paragraph here, it's a paragraph there. But that's how I think she builds these characters into real, believable characters, because they behave like we do. When my husband ignores me, which happens a lot, when he's ignoring me, I go in there and go, "Arr!" So there's a moment of silence. And I'm thinking, you're ignoring me, and he's going like, I'm just I'm reading, I'm thinking, whatever. Anyhow, I think she does a great job with that. And these are parallels in the story. There are lots of parallels in the story. And I think the whole parallel on the domestic abuse is really the most important one in terms of how the story is resolved. And so I think there's just such good stuff in this book, where the author creates parallels. She doesn't repeat a scene per se, but she repeats a concept or a feeling. And we see and understand these characters through these things. She doesn't tell us what to think, she's letting us kind of bring it ourselves to what we all, as humans, would expect or hear. I think that's just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Because in the beginning, didn't you think that Cameron was a good guy? He's the golden boy.
Sure.
And somewhere along the way, you started having that inkling that maybe there's more to this, maybe he's not.
Exactly, and it's the little things like this scene where he takes offense by Nathan not defending him. That's a big deal, because as soon as he does that, he takes offense at Nathan. What does he do? He takes Nathan's girlfriend, we think, and Nathan asks him to go and explain to Ilsa what's happened. He ends up with Ilsa. He's supposed to tell Nathan that Bub did not intend to kill his dog. He doesn't even tell it. It's all this little stuff about Cam that comes out that makes him really be an evil figure in a lot of cases. And we find out about all these dalliances with the backtrackers. It's kind of it's sort of things. And a good author doesn't hit you in the face with this stuff. You just kind of feel it. You kind of sense it as you go along. And I think that's what this author has done with this particular book.
Well, with the character of Liz too at the beginning, it's announced that Cam has been found dead and everything, and she's so upset, and you think it's because she's lost her son.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes most of the book before you know that there are different things, different causes for some of that upset.
But don't you think though, part of it, this is just more, in dealing with Liz, I think she's a very complex character, and she's, like Mike said, she's not very likable early on, but later on you sense that this is really a great conflict. She needs to break up the cycle of abuse. She needs to do it for all the right reasons, and yet it is her son.
Right.
It is her son, and she birthed him, she fed him, she clothed him, she did whatever she could for him, and then all of a sudden he's the person that's going to cause more grief for everybody else. So it's really a tough situation, really tough situation. I thought I did get one line I want to talk about just for 1 second. I promise I'm going to. The interesting thing about this story is, guess what time of the year it is? It's Christmas. That's incredible. You know, it is a Christmas time, and they have, I think there was a description of the lights being around the veranda or the porch, and they're all kind of blowing in the wind, they don't look too good. And there's a line in there in which Nathan comes in, and he's seeing the Christmas stuff, and he says, "There are no tidings of comfort and joy here." Is that not the honest truth? Honest truth. So.
But also, don't forget, Christmas is the middle of summer.
It is the middle of summer,
It's
it's hotter than blue glasses down there, yeah, it's
True.
hot. Yeah, should we move on to the others?
Let's
go.
talk about the
Go for it.
brothers.
Go to the brothers.
So we've talked a little bit about the fact that Cameron and Nathan are much older than Bob, and so they had each other, and Bob was kind of out by himself. We've talked about that a little bit. One of the things I thought was really interesting in the interview that I listened to with Jane Harper was she said, people have a really hard time of changing their opinion of someone after 30 or 40 years. And so these brothers, Cameron, I think is just out for Cameron and probably has been from the beginning, you know. But for Nathan, this is a beloved brother. You know, he's not looking to think of him in this way. It must have been very difficult when the pieces started fitting together for him because he didn't want to believe his brother was a rapist. He didn't want to believe his brother withheld information about the dog or all of these other things. And yet, he's seeing the evidence right in front of him that this brother that he thought he was so close to was not who he thought he was at all. And that Bob, who he thought was kind of, you know, on the spectrum or whatever it was, that maybe he's not. You know, maybe he just has been neglected by everyone, and that if given the right opportunity, he can thrive. And that's what my hope is for Bub, is that he gets away and finds people that can love him.
That's
right. Get his ruse and get out of there. Because Cam, I think we mentioned this also, Cam did not do anything to help Bub develop in terms of a manager of the land either. You know, there was so much he could have done. There's plenty of work to be done, and he could have given him all sorts of different things that could have been his and let him thrive, but he kept everything for himself. He was very selfish person.
I think another great scene there, when this shows my mindset, when Bub is urinating on his father's grave.
Yeah. He hears it out there.
That was really
a lot of
clear.
symbolism in it. I know, just the amount of hatred towards his father and his way of getting back.
Yeah, and
in a very simple way.
Because nobody else he doesn't tell this to his mother, he doesn't tell it to Nathan. They see him off in the distance street. It's not like he's not.
Well, it's dark too.
Yes, it's dark. He is not flaunting this. He's just expressing his deepest emotional feeling for his father. And I thought it was pretty cool. So,
I think he deserved it.
Yeah.
Anything else about the brothers which y'all want to mention? That struck you about their relationship or anything?
Just that Nathan hadn't, it had been a year since he'd seen him.
6 months since he'd seen Cameron. And
Well, a year since he'd seen Cameron's daughter, he said.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, he said he lived 2 or 3 hours away, but that's not that far to go.
It's an adjacent property.
No, it's adjacent. If you look in the front of the book,
Yeah, it's the same place.
they have a little map there, and it's just it's separated by a fence.
Right, but to get to where they're.
Yeah, it takes a little longer.
Station to station. But still, usually you would go visit your family more than once a year if it was 2 or 3 hours.
And it's not just his brother, it's his mom.
Especially if you don't see anyone else. So Nathan's character development, he kind of came along through the book. You could see him putting pieces together and kind of climbing out of that isolation. And at one point, Steve, the nurse, says to him, Nathan, people pretend to themselves that they are fine all the time, every day for years on end. And I think he was realizing to himself that he'd been pretending for a long time, and he needed to make some changes. But the question is he capable of living a healthy adult life? Is he capable a normal life of having a good relationship with Ilsa, being a stepfather to those children? Is that something that would ever have happened? Or do you think he'll sell? What do you think is going to happen to him down the road?
Live happily ever after.
We can only hope. Well, you know, he does make some real progress, though. I think, you know, there's a part, I'm going to read this one paragraph, because I think it's really kind of, because this is really tells you how things are. This is, and he's been, this is when he's met Melanie, and he doesn't know.
Oh, yeah, Melanie.
He doesn't know this girl's hitting on him.
Because he's
How
so,
dumb.
I know, well, I just think he has no social skills anymore. He doesn't even realize, he didn't pick up the cues.
Yeah, the young girl that lives under the station, she comes to the funeral. This is all at the funeral, by
Yes.
the way. Anyhow, so she's trying to get him to say, come on, I'm going to have a drink, come over, but, well, he's not getting this. And so, at one point, here's what his thoughts are. He says, Nathan's thoughts darken fast these days. Maybe not. It had taken Nathan a long time, years, to get used to his life as it was. The swift cue, a cut of rejection, had hurt enough at the time when it was sharp and fresh. But it was the way the wound had festered that had been the killer. He had got through it once barely. He knew with wholehearted certainty that he could not do it again. A group of men jostled out of the room and down the hall in his direction, and Nathan opened the nearest door and stepped inside. He avoids people with evil. But think of that, how bitter that is. But I think he does make progress, and we see it as we go along. He's trying to apologize to Xander in a number of cases. He sees his son as caring for him. He acknowledges that.
He promises Steve he'll come in.
He promises Steve he's going to come in. His mother demands it. He promises to do it. It sounds like he's going to. He makes up, I don't think that's the right word. He contacts his ex-wife and they're not shouting, and they don't have to get a lawyer. That's pretty good. I think that's a pretty progress. That's progress. And he and Bub, after this, and I love the fight scene. Did y'all love that fight scene? They're down there rolling around, throwing punches, just like brothers would. He's down there, and he resolves that issue with Bub. I think that's pretty impressive. There's no reason to think he could do that. They've been separated for years. They've never really been much in touch. And all of a sudden he realizes how important it is to get back with Bub. So I kind of have hopes. I have my hopes. I'm not so sure about Elsa. I have my doubts about that myself. I think that seems like a pretty kinky relationship. So, I'm sorry?
Why?
Well, it's his brother's son.
Yeah, but except I don't know that they ever had much of a relationship because I think she was just stolen goods. I think
Okay.
he just took her.
We did have a spy. We know that.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. So she's lived a life without.
Okay. I'll sign up to that then.
Gary.
We went through this whole story not really knowing what their occupations were. I mean, we know they live on a station. We assume they're either cattle ranchers or sheep ranchers, but we never really know. They don't spend any of their time doing their job. Throughout this entire scene, they never go out and tend to the animals.
Well, I think but actually Nathan talks about the herd. He does talk about the herd, seeing the herd. And I assume herd meant cattle. Hope that's not right, but I did.
I assumed cattle
And
too.
because sometimes they talk about the number of herd, the number of cattle on the station. And the station that Cam is controlling has lots of cattle.
Right.
And Nathan's has very few. So there is a reference to, you're right. They're really busy doing other things besides, running
The herd's on their own.
They're out, yeah, they can take care of themselves, so.
Yes.
Preparation for this and reviewing all of the notes and such, did you get any indication of how she contrived or came up with these characters?
She said, the one thing she said is that she figures out who did it first, and then she goes backwards. So, so she knows what happened, and then she backs it out.
Well, I think what I'm saying is, do you think that she based these characters on anything that she did?
Oh, real person, okay.
Well, it's not her case. She said not her brother. She has a brother and a sister. Because the interviewer asked her, she said she thought the brother relationships were really rung true. And she said, well, it's not my brother. It's not based on my relationship with him, but it's just, I think she's just a really good
Observer of
of character.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important.
They came out really
Convincing.
very whole and convincing.
This is the
We're there.
line from the book. This is toward the end of the book. And this is being told by Harry. I think this is a really good question. That's sort of what you brought up earlier. And you two also, Mike, this is a question about whether or not what we see here should be left alone. Because if you recall at the end of the book, the police officer calls back and Nathan just said, no problem, we're done.
No more emergency.
No more emergencies, we're done. But I think this is really interesting. He says, look, I tell you what I think, mate. Harry cut him short. This is because Nathan is trying to decide what to do. Sometimes, whether by accident or whatever, I reckon sometimes things turn out for the best. And when you end up in the right place, it's not always helpful to go digging up the road that got you there, you know. Now that, I mean, is this justice?
The ends justify the means.
Is it legal? Is it responsible? I mean, you think about it, this is a Greek tragedy. The mother kills one of her children right out of Medea. Okay, really kind of messy, you know. There's all kinds of bullying, hurting people. Lots of stuff's going on in this book. Yeah, and
There was a point in Cameron's conversation with her, he had pulled the plastic envelope of the documents.
Yes, the passport.
He threw them in the truck, and he said, I'm going home to talk to
Ilsa.
And then he added, and maybe the girls. And I think that was the whole crux of the.
That's the reason, huh? Okay, all right. So is it justified? Is she right? And should they leave this alone?
So that, I thought she was, that when he added the girls, I thought, uh-oh.
There was also an implication that she had let her husband die in that car.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah,
yes, I
yeah.
think so. Killed her
So
husband.
she killed before to save part of her family or herself.
Mhm.
And to do it the second time, which I think when he said that, what you're referring to, I think that's when she broke and she just took off.
And left him there.
Right.
Okay, all right. So should Nathan and Ilsa and Liz and Bob just leave it alone?
Yes.
Look at that.
There's so
Oh,
many
my
crimes
God.
in this book that go unanswered. I mean, is justice separate from law?
Or wouldn't cross Liz.
That
She
is
wouldn't cross Liz.
Well, even in our world today, when something like that happens, well, of course, there aren't too many mother killing son situations, but spouses killing spouses through abuse.
Domestic abuse?
Precipitated by serious domestic abuse. Even though the law takes action, they're usually pretty easy on the murderer or the murderess because of what drove the one person to kill the other person. So that's taken into account even today in our society and the rule of law. And then every once in a while you'll get the same theme in fiction too, in movies or well, even songs. Remember the Dixie Chick song about Earl? Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah.
Nobody missed Earl.
Yeah, nobody missed Earl. Yeah. Well, you know, it's really, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing because there really are, you know, this is a case of, maybe it's because of this environment, maybe it's also still because of this environment. The justice out here may not be legal justice. Maybe it's not important down here because it's a small, limited community that has interaction. Maybe this justice would be accepted by everybody else in the community if they knew all those things. Maybe they would. And maybe that's part of that small locked room that we're dealing with in this book. You know, because it's really an important question. You know, do you just let things go? It's been resolved. Those children will no longer be abused, which is Anne's point. Those children will no longer be abused. The mother is still suffering at the end of the book. She's hardly in good shape still. She's still suffering. And we have high hopes, quote unquote, for Nathan and Ilsa because they're going to go off and get ready for flood. I love it. They're going to go prepare the other station for flood control. Who's kidding who?
Flood control.
That's right after they got out of the back of the car. So.
You know, you can remember your discussion of truth. Well, in this situation, there are several truths. There's a legal truth that are coming forward. There's a societal truth, like, you know, canceling Nathan. And then there is a justice that the people work out for themselves because of the environment, because of how they were raised, what goes right, what goes wrong, and do people go off the end. You know, the end justifies the means. So I think that, you know, when you say there's truth that stays, there's truth that moves, and then there's no truth. And we are all confused by that, in just watch television for a while. And then imagine yourself in Japan watching our news, you know, because their version of truth is very different than ours.
Yes,
So
exactly.
if you're gonna figure out truth, when you go from place to place, and this is one of the most peculiar places, then, you know, that you have to try to figure that out, how through their skin and their eyes, they're viewing and justifying what truth is and how it changes over time. And I think Liz made a big change in truth.
Oh, yes.
That this is gonna stop.
Right, she broke the cycle of generational abuse. That's
Yes.
exactly what she does, exactly.
Well, the family all knows the truth now.
I don't think they all do.
I don't
Maybe
think
not the little ones.
I don't think Bub knows, I don't think Bub
so.
has
I
a
don't think
clue.
so either. I think Nathan
You don't
knows.
think Bob knows?
No, I don't think he knows.
Well, my question was gonna be, even though this sergeant or law enforcement person called and Nathan told him everything's fine, is he not gonna have a question in his mind about why Cameron died?
No, I don't think so. I think the biggest red herring, this is what Cindy and I talked about this, I think the biggest red herring in the book is suicide. Every time you turn around, someone's talking about, oh, gosh, Nathan, you took your guns away from yourself. Well, watch out for him, you might get him back. And then there's somebody else saying, well, you know, but Dad, I'm worried about you, you know, you're off by yourself. Don't go off, be sure you turn your radio on. I think the suicide.
And people thought that
Right.
Cameron committed
Suicide.
suicide.
I think
So
it's-
it's not like there's an unsolved murder here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They think he killed himself.
Right, and they don't know why necessarily.
Right.
And they're
probably
told,
really care.
and based on the way the family operates, it's fully acceptable that that's what happened.
Yeah, I don't think Bubba has a clue. Don't think certainly the girls don't have a clue, and I'm not even sure Elsa knows.
I want to ask y'all the Stockman story that Nathan found in the library. When he came out and told the story, you know, that the Stockman saved his family. Is Liz a Stockman? Is she the modern day Stockman?
Saves her family.
And
Or
Cameron
is she
still, but he
guilty?
doesn't know it.
Oh, because he dies? Tell me, I don't know.
Yeah, well, he saved his family by dying, he didn't do it on purpose.
Okay.
He was killed.
Ah.
Okay.
But I mean, basically, he did save his family because now he's gone.
Well, that's an interesting.
Yeah.
He's
I
out of
never
the
thought
picture.
Yeah, he is gone, and that resolved the question.
There are
What-
other red herrings that weren't.
Yeah, oh, there are some, which ones were you thinking about?
Well, I think of Harry.
Yes, you
For
think
a
he might
while, I
be.
was hooked on, this guy isn't quite right, and then there was the woman that ostensibly got raped, who was off in
Jenna.
Bali.
Jenna Portscott, yeah.
That was a big red herring
Yes.
for quite some
Yes.
time.
Well, and Xander thinks Harry might have done it.
Right.
And so Xander thinks Harry might have done it. And I actually think that at some point in time, Nathan may have thought that as well. No one thinks Liz has done it.
Right.
But the community, the people around, talk about Nathan as being a possible suicide. They know that they think Cameron is, and Nathan is the next likely candidate. So I think that's why I think of it being a red herring. It just keeps coming up over and over in the story, and it's misleading. But yes, there are other instances, other characters are thought to be the reason.
Well, right at the beginning of the book, of the story, Nathan wonders, why wasn't Bub there to meet him up there where he was supposed
Right,
to
there's,
be?
yes,
So
one of the
you're kind of
questions.
wondering if he's suspecting Bub, and then there's a time or two where they see that backpacker.
Yes, Simon.
Right.
Seems to be
Simon.
kind
Well, he
of
has reason to. His
suspicious.
girlfriend's pregnant
Yeah.
by Cam. So there are other
Yeah.
people in there. Yes, exactly. Well, so what do you think? You think it's worth reading?
Oh,
I think it's worth reading.
Yes.
Well, the other books are worth reading too. The Dry is my second favorite one.
Yeah.
Is your second favorite one? I liked it too. And I'm looking forward to reading the next one. So the next one's about women. Yeah, it's about two women. Yeah.
I haven't read the Survivor yet. That's one.
I read it. It's set in Tasmania, but it's all set in Australia. So.
Sandra.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for today.